Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. Do I ever have a conversation for you today? Recently, the Collective think tank sponsored an incredible study on just how much college athletics departments are missing the moment, the money, and the mission when it comes to women's sports. A quote from the report says it all. Across every metric, women's college sports have never been stronger. From record-breaking crowds to soaring media attention, the momentum is undeniable. Programs, athletes, and fans are finally getting the recognition they've long deserved. Women now make up nearly half of NCAA athletes, and yet, despite this, the system is built to support them still looks like it's stuck in the 1980s. Participation has plateaued, coaching gaps are widening, and Title IX compliance, let's just say the scorecard is far from championship ready. The current reality before athletic departments rush into another year of realignment, roster caps, and revenue sharing chaos, this report delivers a reality check. Women's sports are booming everywhere, except inside the NCAA model built to serve them. Joining me to talk about this incredible opportunity for presidents and boards to leverage this momentum are the scholars behind this report. Shannon Kerwin, Associate Professor at Brock University. Shannon, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Jacqueline McDowell, Associate Professor at George Mason University. Jacqueline, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Martha McGrath Brown, Assistant Professor at Westminster College in Pennsylvania. Martha, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Barbara Osborne, Professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Welcome to the podcast.
Thrilled to be here.
And finally, Janelle Wells, Associate Professor at the University of South Florida. Janelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Karen, for creating and holding this conversation.
Thrilled to do it. So, Jacqueline, you're going to start us off kind of outlining the framing of this podcast so the listeners can understand where we're going.
Yes. And so this work, it really began with a simple but important question. How do we ensure that the progress we've seen in women's sports over, let's say, the last 50 years doesn't stall or worse, move backwards? And so our team and this report are the result of a partnership with the Collective think tank. This is actually a first of its kind initiative that brings together academics and industry professionals who share this commitment to advancing gender equity and diversity across sports. But the broader goal of this partnership is bridging that gap between academia and the industry so that research doesn't just sit in journals, but actually shapes practice, policies, and the future of women's sports. And so I definitely want to take time to thank this research team, Shannon, Martha, Barbara, and Janelle, for all their work, their commitment to this process. And as you'll see, we all bring different layers of expertise, which allowed us to continue and extend one of the most important longitudinal studies in sport, the Acosta-Carpenter report. And with that, I definitely want to thank Vivian Acosta and Linda Carpenter, who sort of our work, they made this research possible. For 37 years, their work served as a gold standard for tracking women's participation and leadership in sport. And so being able to continue this research, it's critical because it allows us to move beyond the assumptions and to truly understand where we're at today. And as you'll hear today, the data shows the progress that's been made, but also the gaps that still exist. And we're hoping that it will give institutions the information that they need to make intentional and informed decisions. And so we're very happy to be invited on today's podcast.
That's great. So we have 4 topics that we're going to kind of cover so that boards and trustees and presidents can understand how the landscape is changing so fast. And then we're going to use an example at the end that literally just happened in the last 2 weeks that ought to help you understand how much you need to embrace these ideas. So let's start with number 1, Barbara and Martha. Jump on in.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I was recently kind of rereading an article from a Sports Business Journal by Rachel Axum that came out last October, where she was talking about how brands are working with women's professional sports and how they are benefiting from that. Just a couple of factoids from that is Sponsor United found that since 2022, the number of brands sponsoring women's sports has grown by around 22%. And another quote from inside that article came from our fearless leader of the collective, Thayer Lavielle. She used to be with L'Oreal, and she said 15 years ago, makeup brands wouldn't even touch athletic sponsorship, and oh, how things have changed since then as makeup brands make up how many of the sponsorship of women's sports these days. And thinking about just those couple of gains, in addition to thinking about the Caitlin Clark effect and things like that, that kind of leads the everyday sports fan to believe that women's sports continues to, be on the rise, which is true when it comes to professional sports. However, and that's a big however, the biggest opportunity for these brands lies in women's collegiate sports because, for the most part, it's really an untapped resource. The pipeline that we have from high school to college to then the pros for women, it needs to see growth. It needs to see continual building. But unfortunately, these girls and women aren't supported or well resourced. And that should be all that brands need to hear. Just because what brands are seeing at that professional level. We need to be investing in, women's intercollegiate sports to be continuing that pipeline as we go. And something else that came out of our report, and this can kind of be a message directly to our audience, is that brands are prioritizing schools that demonstrate kind of this measurable equity and uphold their commitment to inclusion. This public EADA data that we used in Title IX visibility mean that the disparities that exist are easy to spot, and that partners are rewarding the institutions who the brands see eye to eye with, because a brand isn't going to sign any kind of partnership deal with someone that they don't align with directly their mission and values. So equity is becoming a competitive advantage in attracting sponsorship, donors, and media attention, and representation and transparency are quickly becoming these prerequisites for partnership. And that's something that needs to be kept in mind. And Barbara?
Yeah, the everything that's positive that's happening overall in the industry is happening in spite of what's happening sort of within the college athletics programs. The NCAA didn't add women's sports until the 1980s, and the governance structure itself continues to be dominated by male leaders, which favor football and men's basketball above all other sports. There are still athletics programs that don't have a single woman in a leadership position, and the inequities that are existing in athletics programs don't exist in a vacuum. They are starting from the top down. Schools have historically taken a risk management approach to women's sports. Don't worry too much about it unless somebody complains. And the result in higher education of Title IX has been a tremendous growth and opportunity for women in the student body. But we don't see that same thing happening for women's sports. If you look at college athletics participation as an extension of your educational opportunity, that lack of equitable opportunity for women to gain those experiences through sport has a long-term social impact as well as on women's advancement and then their competitive growth opportunity in the workforce. Schools need to be intentional. Emerging financial issues like NIL and revenue sharing, we are seeing a significantly disproportionate disadvantage. Between 90 and 99% of the reported revenue share that we're seeing in media is being provided to male athletes who are already receiving the most non-monetary benefits within athletics programs. And that type of revenue share not only violates Title IX, but it's also threatening the existence of women's sports and all other men's sports, because those rev share dollars were previously allocated across the entire athletics department. So we need to really look at athletics programs and how they serve the mission of the institution and how to serve those programs so that they better represent what the values and mission of the institution is. And that isn't being done from the top down.
Great point. Okay, so let's move on to point 2, Janelle and Shannon.
Yeah. So, Karen, all of us in this room have probably used this in one of our research papers or discussion points with practitioners, saying that systems weren't designed for us or by us. And yet the NCAA has been around for 120 years now. And here we are still operating somewhat on this older design system. And now, yes, it has evolved, but there is so much potential for even more evolution. And we say this, and Barbara had just said it, like it took lawsuits. It took lawsuits even when, as Acosta Carpenter said, it was a takeover, the AIAW in the 80s. But now that's what's happening. And that is what is forcing the change, is these lawsuits. It has positively impacted female opportunities for females specifically. And as long as I'd say, if we continue to do this, the barrier of a litmus test or this organizational fit in hires, it's going to be difficult to reach parity. And we say that because even in Acosta and Carpenter's landmark studies, prior to Title IX, 90% of women's teams were coached by women. And today, that's at 43%. So yes, we've made gains in women athletes and girls and women participating, but you're not seeing that happen into getting the leadership positions. So we've played at higher levels. We have highest participations, but we're not seeing at the highest levels of leadership opportunities. And particularly, here's one example where we can call in this audience, is because just in last year, there was a hiring committee for a new athletic director. This is a Division I, but yet the entire hiring committee, the search committee, was all males. And so you can't tell me. And so, we've even said, if we look at who is in these leadership positions, not just in athletics, right, but on the academic side, who are the main sitting presidents, right? I think it's only about 30% that are females. Okay. And then when you get to even the Research One institutions, where a lot of the FBS divisions are, it's even less. It's even closer to 20%. And so how are we diversifying our hiring committees? Because why in 2025 is it an all male hiring committee? You're not telling me that there's no one in the leadership on the academic side. There was no coaches to represent, and there was no student athletes to represent as well, to have the voice of 50% of your student athletes if you were compliant with Title IX. And so we have to have this. So that would allow not to have the litmus test like, oh, they're not the right fit. It would allow us to just be more diverse. And also, I think another point, Shannon, please jump in here, is the racial diversity as well. Yes, we're talking about males and females, but we are seeing now participation be as diverse as ever. We have the most diverse generation now in the classroom, and yet that still is not translating. And so who holds the power on the hiring and in these positions of leadership? But what else, Shannon?
Yeah, no, Janelle, thank you for that. And a great bridge into what Martha was talking about, as well as what you're saying. And what we're challenging our listeners here to think about is almost simple terms. So we use the term representation a lot. We use the term equity a lot. We use equality a lot. And we throw those around as buzzwords. But what do you actually mean by those terms? And so if I think to representation, and you brought it up, Martha, in terms of representation around how we're sponsoring, who we're sponsoring, the markets that we're targeting. But in Janelle's example, when you're creating a system that is meant to create equality, so more women in leadership positions, then there should be a vast level of representation on your hiring committees. And that's one way of thinking about it. If we're trying to make this come to reality, is collect data. This is the point of our group, is showing the power of data. Get some data to find out, who are you serving, who should be sitting on those hiring committees. And inevitably, because when we see who we're representing, it's diverse populations, then inevitably those hiring committees, as the example is, should be diverse. And so we can have those tools to move forward. The biggest thing I advocate for when we think of the pipeline is we oftentimes just think about equality, even if we're saying equity. So equity is the system itself. And how is the system actually built to serve more women or folks from intersectional backgrounds, diverse populations? And I think what we're going to talk about at the end of this podcast, which is that landmark WNBA contract, is if you look at the terms of that contract, that is equity in action. That is key points that serve women in leadership positions. And I'll pull out one point, I know we're going to get to it in more detail, is the amount of times that the idea of family benefit and the benefit of certain maternal health characteristics within that agreement, that is equity. You're now asking women to go into a space that is built for them and not built for someone else. And when we get there, I think that's when we will start to see equity, and we can move through that pipeline that we're talking about. So just trying to give two tangible examples of one, challenging the listener to really know what you mean when you say equity, equality, representation, diversity, and then collect some data so those decisions are informed. I know so many people want to do this good work, but it's like, where do I start? Yeah. Hopefully with what we're providing from the report, the leadership of this amazing team of women helps us see that. And I know I've learned a ton from being involved in this group. And so hopefully that can translate to some of the audience as well.
That's terrific. So let's move into some of the things that trustees and presidents think about, which is enrollment, retention, tuition pricing. And we've traditionally presented women's sports as a model, just like men's. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to have the same kinds of experiences at the women's game as we do at the men, the same kind of environment, that type of thing. But if you look at the fans that we attract, whether they're our own students or whether they're our friends and family or whether they're a larger community base, my goodness, when I saw an unrivaled basketball match up here in Philadelphia a few weeks ago, 21,000 people who we have never hosted since 1998, a professional women's basketball game here, and the place was oversold. And the diversity of people that were in that audience, I thought to myself, how many of them really watch men's sports? Or are those that we are missing because we're not paying attention to the difference in the audiences? So talk a little bit about what trustees should think about with enrollment, retention, and tuition pricing and broadening our audiences for our institution.
So I think that those problems are obviously always top of mind for presidents and leadership in higher education. And I think that when you're looking at how your women's athletics program can serve those interests, one of the things that you need to look at, again, related to the data, is that female athletes are staying in their programs. They don't transfer as often, and they actually graduate at a higher rate than your male athletes do. Female athletes are more connected to your immediate community. Fans are more likely to connect directly with the athletes. Female athletes do a better job of presenting themselves through social media and connecting with community that way. So we can't look at just promoting our women's programs in the same way that we've always promoted the men's, because fans of men's teams are different than fans of women's teams. It's not saying that you can't be both, and there are people that are both, but just saying, okay, this is what we do for football or baseball or basketball doesn't mean that it's going to be successful if you do that for a women's team. But if you're innovative and thinking about who are the people who like to watch women's sports or why are women's sports attractive to those people, then you're going to approach things differently. If you can sell out a football stadium for a women's volleyball match, think about that. It's not football fans that went to that match.
That's right.
And when you're looking at the number of people to fill a Nebraska football stadium, that was an effort to not only align the campus community, but the general community around supporting a women's program and setting a record. And the way they promoted that was completely different than the way they would have gone about promoting a football game or a baseball game or anything like that. So it's important, again, for the leadership to recognize differences, but recognize differences as strengths and then play to those strengths.
That's great.
Yes, I wanted to go a little deeper on that volleyball example because we do need to generate interest with these experiential opportunities. And that example of the volleyball being in the football stadium. And let's peel that back even more in that example. Nebraska has sold out their volleyball games since 2001. Okay. So today they're at a 25-year, but at that time, it took them 22 years, right, to allow more capacity, to have this in a football stadium. But yet the demand was there, but we were limiting it by our arena size. And yet we still didn't take a risk, but yet we've been doing these experiential opportunities, particularly in male sports, for a very long time. And so I call in coaches to be more comfortable with that discomfort. Like, are they going to show up? No, they are showing up. We're calling for this, right? There is an appetite for it. And so I encourage more, whether it's the presidents or athletic directors and the leadership, encouraging the coaches to take some more of these risks, right? And allow these experiential opportunities really for the fandom. And we always go back to, because a lot of the research is showing too about this community-driven fandom around women's sports. And so while I'll use an example, like maybe a mother can't make it on a Tuesday night for whatever reason, but hey, I'm going to plan to go see, the next one is going to be at Wrigley, right? We're going to see at Wrigley Field, Big Ten SEC volleyball game. Let me plan a weekend for me to go. And I have that date. I have that date months in advance, right? Not a 9 p.m. start time that I got 2 weeks before or a week
That's
ahead,
right.
right?
That's
It
right.
allows me that time and it allows me to spend time with the community. And whatever that community means to me as a fan is really important. So thanks, Barbara, for setting that up. But I just wanted to expand that kind of case study and give more examples of these experiential opportunities that are finally happening when it's around women's sports.
But when we think about this, the words that I keep hearing around are the different engagement levels, and whether it be from your local communities or a national television audience, they want to see something that feels like it's community driven, that's focused on the players, and the players get that. I mean, women's sports has always been about connecting fans. All you have to do is think back a couple of years ago when Caitlin Clark would stand for an hour after the game and sign autographs. And that's the connection that all of the athletes on the women's side seem to want to have with their fan base. It's event based. So how can you create more events that allow people to see the athletes up close and personal, that type of thing? It's generated by the athletes. And in fact, I just saw there was a discussion in the Mountain West Conference with some extra games that didn't get picked up by some of the national television networks, that they're going to turn those videos over to the players and let them create NIL and their own personality driven content so that the players can benefit from that. And I thought, wow, what a creative idea. And of course, so much of this is digital today. That kind of content could be very valuable. How else can we use this to accelerate the growth of women's sports so that the NCAA doesn't still feel stuck in the 1980s?
Karen, I love what you just said. And I just want to mention there's so much opportunity right now. We need to stop presenting women's sports as a smaller version of men's sports.
Yes.
And just what you shared, we have to start positioning them as a different kind of experience. The way I look at it, they are different. Women's sports are different. And in my opinion, it's in many ways, but it's more of a modern model. When you talked about what students and what individuals are looking for, they're looking at this sense of connection, this sense of community. And that's something that we do get from women's sports. And so we do have to start realizing that women's sports honestly are a little bit more aligned with some of the values that we're sharing when we're inside these institutions.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, could I jump in? I'm going to push it a little bit outside of the box in terms of how we might push our listeners to think about this as well. And it kind of along the lines of Jacqueline, what you were just saying is thinking about this in a different way. And one of the ways we do that is recognizing that we should be tapping other people outside of our current decision-making circle. And why I say that is the power of this group. So I think of the wonderful women that were involved in this report, and we are all in the same field, but don't necessarily work together because our area of expertise, I know no one can see my finger quotes, but the area of expertise is very different in some cases. And so the power of this group is we're sitting in this room and one, I'm getting educated by all of these folks on their points of expertise. And then sometimes I add a little nugget here and there for my own expertise. But I think what we end up doing is we sit in our silos too much, and then we don't actually go out and pull people into our network. So back to Jacqueline's point is if we want to know how to think about women's sport differently, invite those folks into the decision-making space so that we can learn from them. And then you're still in the decision-making role. You're still the leader, but now you can't unhear what you just heard. So you pull that into your process. I've loved that part of this group is really learning from everyone. And then you see that the breadth of the report is because well, all these ideas coming at us. And how wonderful is that? More information is great. I know we're in a space right now where we get tons of information and maybe not information we always want, but at the same time, it's what we do with that. I think that's really meaningful and challenging folks to think that way. So open your network a bit and get some more ideas in.
One other thing that I think you guys recognized in your report, and certainly we know that we in college, higher education, like to think of our populations as multiracial, ethnic. And yet when you look at the staff, women's teams from mostly, but you look at it how very much white they are and how very much male dominated they are. And I think that there might need to be a shift in not hiring the best people, because that's important, but understanding what message that sends about the future for the young people sitting in the audience saying, can I do that someday? Will they consider hiring me in this thing? And women's sports embracing multi-ethnic, multiracial fan base, might we do a better job of trying to encourage that? I open it up to the floor.
Not might, but we should do a better job of encouraging that, because that representation, it's not just a moral issue, it's a market issue. And so for athletic directors and for presidents who are listening, this is one of the most powerful ways that an institution can grow their fan base, and it kind of embraces them becoming this truly welcoming environment. I always tell people this, it sends the signal of who actually does belong. It affects your recruitment pipeline. It affects the fans who want to see themselves represented in the program. And so it's not just about who it is that we're hiring. It really is, what is it that it signals when we're not being mindful of multiracial and multi-ethnic coaching and our administrative staff. Some of the comments that's been said, here by some of the other researchers, this is so important for presidents and these ADs to understand. When you have a search committee and you're not thinking about having a diverse search committee, we have to think about how our actions will result in different decisions that are being made.
Okay, now you're hearing what Jacqueline just said is like, okay, how do I engage in this conversation? I'll flip back to this notion of gaining perspective. And so having more diverse people around the table allows us to answer some of the questions. I know I'll use myself as an example when we're on hiring committees. And for listeners, like identifying my white privilege in those spaces is to say, I've made assumptions in the past. Well, we put out the call and this is who we received in terms of applications. And that's typically, and oftentimes when we say equity and the barriers, is if we don't have representation around the room, we don't understand that it's something in the call actually that's prohibiting folks from walking into the space and feeling comfortable. Or it might be the way in which we deliver or the point of contact in terms of how we communicate it. And so almost calling ourselves in here to really be mindful of coming back to the power of representation. And when more folks are able to have their voice in that space, we start to see where the barriers are that, given our point of privilege, we may not have seen historically. And seeing that, and again, coming back to once you see it, you don't unsee it. So you should be moving forward in that space. So that representation, as Jacqueline said, is so, so important. And that's one of the first steps to understand who's not in the room and then why. That question of why, it's not because they're not interested. It's because of our structures. So push forward to understand what that is.
No,
Shannon, it is the access even to that advertisement.
Yeah.
Right. So it might have only gone, oh, we always send this to the association, or we always send it to this institution, right? If we constantly send it, like it's the same echo chamber, right? Or it's the same pipeline instead of this broader draw in accessibility. And sometimes that is, we've always used the same executive search firm, right? And so have we diversified that? Have we called and challenged the executive search firms, for a broader draw, or where are you reaching, right? And so, sometimes we just think of our institutions, but it is that accessibility to it as well.
Yeah.
And I was just going to add, the statements have been made about, well, we're, hemmed in by the laws that are on the books right now, or the current administration and whatnot. And my thinking is that, okay, we're all very smart people here. Can we not come up with better wording, better, use of the English language to get better points across of what we're looking for in a way that better expresses our needs, that signal that we want to invite representation, that we want to invite inclusivity and all of those things? Because I think that there is a way to do that, and it's going to take more work, but okay, let's do the work if that's what we're truly saying that we're going to do. And I just don't think that there should be an excuse about that.
So speaking of doing the work, the WNBA Players Association really drew a hard line in the sand, and they said, no, it's not okay that we're only getting paid a salary cap per team of $1.5 million a year. That is not okay, because we know we are making, as a league, all kinds of money for the NBA and WNBA owners. So they literally put their foot down and said, we're going to negotiate. After 100 hours of negotiation and bringing in for free the Nobel Prize winning economist Claudia Golden, ESPN reported that the average salaries will rise to $600,000 this season, up from $120,000 last year. And the maximum salary will go from 1.4 million up from 1,000. And the minimum salary now exceeds over 300,000 plus. And you mentioned this earlier, they will have league-wide charter air travel, representing an additional investment of $300 million over the life of the agreement, and first-class travel accommodations for players, new facility standards requiring teams to provide enhanced training and treatment resources, and expanded team staffing requirements, including additional physicians, athletic trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, physical and massage therapists, and nutritionists. Boards and presidents don't often think about those kinds of things. The money jumps out. But all of that support structure will make a huge difference in how those players perform. And I wonder, as researchers, how you might look at that model and say, okay, how can we apply it to college athletics?
I think we can use that model because, one, it's a model of advocacy where when you realize that you are not getting the things that you have worked hard for and the things that you deserve, you have that advocacy. And now you look at the result, just like when you were sharing this, as you can see, we're all excited. This is a long term. This should have happened years ago. But that's why I tell people having the data and sticking with things on a longitudinal basis are worth it, because sometimes you may not get that progress at the beginning, but if you keep going after it and after it, if you keep sharing your narrative, if you keep sharing things, I've always told people change starts with conversations. And so if we keep having these conversations, then we'll start to see the change. And to me, that's one of the lessons. There may be other ones that the researchers will share, but for me, that was a big lesson that came out of this, was that this has been in the news for years. And so finally, we're now starting to see the progress that we needed with the WNBA. And I think we can still see the same thing we need in college sports.
Janelle, what are your thoughts?
Came to me to build on even what Jacqueline had said. It was a power of legitimacy. Like, we finally have value, and multiple stakeholders have recognized this, right? Not just the owners and the league, but the power and the pressure was coming from brands, right? It was coming from the players, was coming from society. And that's what forced the change. And sometimes that's what it does take for the evolution to happen. But I just thought there was power of finally being legitimized. And so I think it sets a new precedent now of the expectations. And I do see, just like we did see, particularly in men's sports, as it professionalized, right? You see that trickle down now into the collegiate space as well. And we will see more of that, of being expected and to legitimize their value.
Barbara, who do you think can stand out and maybe take the reins on this, on the college space? Who's really trying to think positively and forward thinking about women's sports on their campus?
If we looked at the women's basketball league as a model, it was the investment by the NBA that enabled it to become successful. So on campus, it is our college and university presidents, as well as our trustees, who have the power to make that investment and that commitment to providing a much stronger and equitable educational experience through athletics, because that's exactly what athletics programs are supposed to be doing. Without the investment, it's the athletes can demand, but without the support of the leadership, without the allocation and resources to look for more sponsorship, to put the same amount of effort into promoting your women's sports as your men's sports, you're not going to be able to see any of that growth in the same way that other versions of the women's professional basketball leagues were not able to succeed, because they did not have that same kind of core support to launch it and provide it. And I think we're seeing that college athletics, women's college athletics, is exactly in that same place. We are ready to explode if you provide the tools for us to be able to do it.
Martha, how would you advise a president or a trustee member thinking about, okay, how can we make a difference in this space right now?
Well, one of the things I talked with the ladies yesterday about when we were kind of preparing for this is I have a bit of a different perspective because I work at a D3 institution.
Yeah.
And so things are a little bit different for me, but I still think that the continual advocacy, still you need that constant voice, whether it's coming from the students, whether it's coming from the female coaches that we do have on campus, whether it's coming from the sport management professor who's the female, advocate for the students and student athletes. There needs to just be that constant voice reminding folks like we need to be doing better here because there's space to be doing better because you just need to be that squeaky wheel because that's going to get the attention that's needed to help make the change.
Shannon, you're at a Canadian university, and Canada thinks of college sports a lot differently than we do in the US. How much college presidents think about how Canada has been doing some things and how that model might apply to where we are today?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we kind of jump to a lot here in our campus is the idea of inclusion, which we've already talked about, and what that means. And I think I'll also tie back to what the CBA is saying as well when we think about inclusion. And so I'm going to lean into that and highlight my one key point here. And we've said this before in our team, but being inclusive doesn't mean that you're excluding anyone. And so it's not a binary. So inclusive actually opens the door to a lot of conversations. And why this CBA is so important, and one of the things that we talk about here a lot on campus is a CBA outlines required needs that must be served. And so that's really, really important when we think of needs. And that seems like a fundamental right of everyone. So no matter who, again, I come back to, it's not exclusion, it's everyone when we're inclusive, is really understanding that to feel included, that is being a part of a group. So are we serving the needs of the group that we are trying to recruit, that we're trying to target, that we're trying to represent? And I think that's a key piece that we talk a lot about here on campus because we have a lot of CBA talks here around the university around employees and employees' rights, and the athletes are embedded in our university. And that's a key feature of what we're trying to find out is what do you all need? And then how do we serve that? And if that's a simple question that we can start to ask on our university campuses around our athletes, around our athletic directors and departments, around our coaches, we can, I think, start to serve equity. This thing we keep talking about, this ambiguous concept, is really leaning in on that. So I think there's a lot that we can tie together from all the different pieces of our conversation. But I think that CBA conversation around the WNBA is a really great example of a context where those questions were asked. What are your needs? We're now going to build them into requirements. Now you're going to feel more included because we're serving your needs. It's like this wonderful spin of how you can see that as an example. So it does translate across contexts, across countries.
An excellent way to end our conversation. Colleagues, this has been phenomenal. Thank you for your research. Thank you for your deep understanding of the subject matter, this important report that allows us to reset at a moment when college athletics is trying to refigure out the whole model. So Shannon Kerwin, Jacqueline McDowell, Martha McGrath Brown, Barbara Osborne, and Janelle Wells. You all are a tremendous resource. I will link the study in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
You.